This is White Plains Week, the weekly roundup of White Plains, Westchester, and world news. With John Bailey, editor and publisher of the daily internet newspaper White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, WPCNR.com. Jim Beneroff, editor and publisher of SuburbanStreet.com and WhitePlains.com. And me, Peter Katz, formerly with NBC, ABC News, and stations from Boston to Los Angeles. White Plains Week, what's happening? Who are the newsmakers? What's in store for the future? The views and opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the participants. White Plains Week is presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76, Verizon Fios Channel 45, and on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. Now, White Plains Week.
Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. White Plains, Westchester, and the world. And all you transitionists out there, the line forms at Trump Tower. John Bailey, White Plains Week, City News Roundup Show with Jim Beneroff, the Dean of Journalism in the City of White Plains, and Peter Katz, the anchor for all seasons. Jim, the headlines, please.
And here are the headlines for the week of November 18th, 2016. White Plains honors former fireman, an Afghanistan combat veteran, and World War II veteran in annual Veterans Day ceremony. Jury says White Plains not liable in shooting of Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. Racist and Nazi graffiti found on Parkway alongside Bronx River Parkway. Planning Board approves French American School of New York revised site plan, sends it on to Common Council. White Plains Week launches a new feature, Trump in Transition. Board of Legislators resists Westchester County executive proposal to lease county airport for 40 years to balance 2017 budget. Polly Rothstein, women's right to abortion strategist, dies.
Thank you, Jim. And we'll go right away to the newsreel March of Time. This was the Veterans Day ceremony that we started the week with a week ago, and they honored, if we can have the next slide please, they honored the gentleman on the left, former White Plains fireman and Lieutenant Sergeant Major Doug Withus left, the 20-year veteran of the U.S. Army with combat service in Afghanistan, and in the center, Veterans Day honoree Vincent R. Wadden, U.S. Army veteran of World War II, both are residents of White Plains, and it was a terrific ceremony.
That's Mayor Roach on the right, of course.
Well, everybody knows Tom Roach. I'm sorry, my apologies, Mayor, but it was the Veterans Day. All right.
It was, and you know what's really interesting? After all the talk about supporting veterans during the campaign, Donald Trump did not attend any Veterans Day memorial observation this year.
Well, he doesn't have an appointment booker yet, I guess.
President Obama did
Yes,
lay the
right.
wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown in Arlington, as is usually done.
You know, I didn't even catch that in the papers. Usually they have a photo of that, don't they? They used to. Meanwhile, let's go to the next slide, which is in the headlines this morning. This is where it all started, the court case involving the Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. Shooting in White Plains back in 2011. And they reached a verdict in the federal suit in that, and they found that White Plains is not liable and that the officer was entitled to react the way he did.
Well, of course, the case did move to federal court in White Plains,
Right.
which is down the street from what you see here. And this was a jury trial, and it was the jury that decided that White Plains cannot be held liable in this, that the shooting of Mr. Chamberlain was justified given the circumstances of the case. The attorneys for the Chamberlain family say that they will appeal this. decision by the jury, and of course they do have the right to appeal. Going into the trial, the judge handling the case, Judge Seibel, expressed her doubts that they would sustain, that the complaint would be sustained by a jury, but nonetheless she allowed the trial to proceed in the interest of justice. The family had reached out to the city to try to get the city to settle before it went to the jury, and it appears as if the city made the right decision for the city budget anyway, in not negotiating a settlement, since the jury's decision supported the city of White Plains.
They're appealing on the fact that a lot of evidence was excluded.
That's correct.
And we have to recall another case where a lot of evidence was excluded too, which ended up in being overturned.
Well, you're talking about
the
Bradley case
yes.
Involving former Mayor Adam Bradley.
Yeah. But we should divorce the two things. I'm just pointing, exclusion of evidence is always a dangerous thing.
You see what happens on appeal. It's all part of the process.
Right. And the shocker of the week took place, and we learned about it on Monday, and that was that graffiti of racist nature and a Nazi swastika was painted on a path over by Chatterton Hill. The mayor said...
This is right off the Bronx River Parkway.
Right. The mayor said that, ironically, this outrageous act took place in county parkland near the base of Chatterton Hill, where Alexander Hamilton commanded artillery during the Battle of White Plains. The heroism and patriotism displayed that day, preserving our young nation, stands in stark juxtaposition to the cowardice and ignorance of this act, which seeks to divide that nation.
Now,
we will not permit it.
Nationwide, since the election, we have seen what, by my accounts, are now close to 700 incidents around the country of either anti-Semitic, anti-black, or a white supremacist or Nazi nature. Within the 2 days after the election, there were about 400 of those incidents recorded. Now, on this one here in White Plains, County Executive Rob Astorino immediately upon this discovery held a news conference at the scene,
investigating,
and there were workers out there removing the offensive material. So. Let us hope that we can put an end to this nonsense, reprehensible
And
nonsense.
one may ask why this has happened, because it has been legitimized by the presidential campaign we have just seen conclude.
That is an opinion which you hear fairly widely expressed, that
it's okay to hate.
Because of the campaign, because of websites like Breitbart.com, which spread this stuff on the internet, somehow it has been legitimized.
And it continues.
Yeah.
You know? It continues. And right now, we're going to start a new feature here in White Plains, on White Plains Week, and that is Transition to Trump, or Trump in Transition, whatever happens first. Peter, your comments on the 9 days since the election?
Well, as we speak right now, the Trump transition team has been working on appointments. There's a cabinet to fill. There's something like 4,000 federal jobs that are filled by presidential appointment. So they have an awful lot of work to do. Now, the way things stand as of this morning, as of our recording, there have been no official announcements, and it's not official until President-elect Trump gets out there in front of the cameras and microphones and says, these are the people.
Or changes his mind.
Or changes his mind, and that's been known to happen.
Yes, right.
But here's some of what we hear. Senator Jeff Sessions, Republican of Alabama, has been picked as Attorney General. He has accepted that. Now, that's interesting, especially against the background of the incidents that we've seen around the country, because in 1986, Sessions became only the second nominee in 50 years to be denied confirmation as a federal judge after allegations that he had made racist remarks. The Senate said, no way, we're not confirming this guy. And Sessions at the time denied that he was a racist, but he also said the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, and the American Civil Liberties Union could be considered un-American.
Well,
We hear that three-term Republican Congressman Mike Pompeo has accepted appointment as the director of the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency. He has been an opponent of the Obama administration's policies, was a crusader against Hillary Clinton as a member of the Republican Benghazi Investigation Committee. Steve Bannon has been appointed as chief strategist for President Trump. He will have very, very close input, very close contact. He will work with the president on not only a daily basis and an hourly basis, but a minute-by-minute basis. Bannon's appointment has brought cries of foul from many quarters because of Bannon's association with Breitbart.com, which is a rather radical website slightly to the right of Attila the Hun, which has posted in the past anti-Semitic things, anti-black things, white power things, strong nationalist things.
yes.
And Bannon, most notably, is said to have, in a divorce of his wife some years ago, said that one of the reasons he wanted the divorce was because the wife wanted to allow their children to go to school with Jewish children.
Yes, very disturbing. But
Reince
we sometimes change our minds.
Reince Priebus, the National Republican Committee chairman, has been named White House Chief of Staff. Now, that appointment generally was welcomed because Priebus is somewhat establishment, has knowledge of how things work in Washington, and has been somewhat of a moderating force during the Trump campaign.
And let's see, Nikki Haley you mentioned? Is
Nikki
coming
Haley
into,
has not been
comments?
offered anything, but she is the governor of South Carolina and is being considered for a possible post, possibly for the Secretary of Education. Also possibly being considered, Sarah Palin, remember her? She's the one who was able to see Russia from her house in Alaska. She presumably is being considered for Secretary of Interior. That would give her control over thousands and thousands of acres of federal land, the national parks, and there have been
And what will she do with those?
well,
is
there's
the
been a
question.
great desire on the part of many Republicans to sell or lease those lands to private developers.
Yes, it's breathtaking.
It's breathtaking. Trump last night was caught in a grade A lie. In fact, the internet this
He
morning...
only specializes
The
in those,
internet this
doesn't he?
morning was just rife with the phrase "liar, liar, pants on fire."
Yes.
He tweeted out taking credit for convincing the Ford Motor Company not to close a plant in Kentucky. Turns out they never had plans to close a plant in Kentucky.
And was there not a story about that in the New York Times not too long ago?
And in fact, they have been talking about building a new plant in Mexico where some of the lower line cars would be built for Ford. However, doing that, they say, would not cost any jobs in Michigan or in any other Ford plant, and that this whole thing has been negotiated and worked out with the United Auto Workers Union.
Right.
So-
Well, we'll see. But this trend, if you're going to keep jobs or even bring back jobs in America, has to be arrested.
Yeah,
Well,
it does.
manufacturing is not going to come back to America. That's
Cheap labor. If you can make sneakers for a buck,
it's not even
you're not
cheap labor. There's a lot of things that are affecting it.
Yeah.
Number one, you have 3D printers, which can make an awful lot of stuff. And some of the auto companies already use them on a large scale.
Well, that's true. I mean, technology is evolving, and you can't roll back technology. You just can't roll back the clock on that.
Can't use it either.
One other thing that Trump has done, which has caused some consternation in many circles, including national security circles, is that he has named General Michael Flynn as his national security advisor. Now, Flynn was unceremoniously bounced by President Obama. It was discovered that Flynn was on the payroll of Russia and Turkey at the same time he was serving the U.S. national security community.
Yeah.
We
how can you do that?
also heard this week that the Trump name has been removed from 3 buildings on the West Side Highway.
Maybe we should remove it from White Plains, right?
Some people in the city have said, well, maybe we should do that here too. You know.
Right. Well, that's a city issue. How do we feel about that, Mr. and Mrs. White Plains? Okay.
Also, this week, just very quickly, Hillary Clinton made her first appearance in public. She made a little speech, and she said that she would like to stay engaged. She urged all of her supporters to stay engaged and to be active, and she said it's been quite an experience for her.
Yes, it has. Now, Peter, one of the casualties of Mr. Trump's plan to issue executive order reversals that President Obama issued may be the ability for Americans to travel to Cuba on educational missions.
Now, as we know, what Trump has said is that the first day in office, he will reverse every executive order ever issued by President Obama.
Yeah.
And as we know, this country has had a long-term situation with Cuba, whereby there were sanctions. There were we all remember the Cuban blockade during the missile crisis, and it has been illegal to conduct any kind of trade to travel to Cuba. Obama loosened that up somewhat, and John is one of the fortunate few who has been able to travel to Cuba.
Right, and this is what I learned on my trip 2 weeks ago on the opportunities in Cuba and what Cuba wants from the USA. This is the approach on JetBlue, just south of Havana. This is the Havana Air Terminal, where there are no jetways. And you disembark the aircraft via roll-up stairways, a throwback to when travel was glamorous.
Well, they still do that at Westchester Airport on occasion.
Yeah, and then we drive in and we see the great sculpture of Che Guevara on one of the government buildings in Freedom Square, and you know you've arrived. And then you see the Riviera Hotel right to the slight right of your screen, where Meyer Lansky ran the mafia gambling and drug operations for decades, where wealth was concentrated in Havana and the rest of Cuba was in really bad shape. This is the fabulous drive at the entrance to Havana Harbor and the famous Morro Castle there. I saw the Bay of Pigs here. That is me swimming. Pardon for the nudity there. And the thing I learned at the Bay of Pigs was that Cuba knew the Cuban invasion force was coming because the CIA trained Cuban soldiers talked about the invasion in bars in Guatemala where they were being trained, and spies conveyed the information to Fidel Castro's government. Mr. Castro was able to split his defensive forces in 3 spots to meet them and defeat them in 72 hours with tanks, aircraft, and it's a major bungle by the CIA. I met amazing youths in training at Cuban special schools like this one. These are acrobats, and they were tremendously talented and fearless. Cuba is very agricultural, and besides the amazing number of cars from the 1950s, the majority of persons in the countryside rely on horse and buckboards to clip-clop into town. They also dry rice on the sides of highways. It's an amazing sight. I visited one of the most moving memorials I've ever seen, the Che Guevara Mausoleum in Santa Clara, Cuba. I also saw a food market in Trinidad where you can buy meat right off the farm, and all sorts of produce, but that's basically your basic market. Now, outside Trinidad, before we go, I want to show you this house. That is the house where Cortez stayed in Trinidad back in the 16th century on his way to take over Mexico and win Mexico for the Spanish Empire. And outside Trinidad, I saw this valley, the Valley of the Sugar Mills, where slave labor made Spain wealthy and property owners rich. This was such a sugar plantation dating from 1832, and it is so silent, especially the slave quarters right here. The slave quarters, where 150 slaves worked on this plantation 20 hours a day, mostly on a diet of alcohol distilled from sugar cane. In the silence, you can feel the inhumanity of slavery in any form. Cubans still have ration books like this one, where those in need of assistance purchase staples. I returned to Havana and noted the spectacular view of a 1752 Spanish fortress on the way to Ernest Hemingway's home, shown here. Nope. That is Hemingway's home. You can look into the windows and see it exactly as the great author left it. Spectacular. That's where he lived with Martha Gellhorn. And this is the most historic site, if we can go back to the harbor shot, where that freighter is positioned, is where the Maine was sunk back in 1898. It's fast. Cuba is history. And that's what I got from that trip. What does Cuba need from the world? Infrastructure, a viable, affordable internet connection throughout the country. Now the net is very expensive for Cubans to access. I was told they want development, but Cubans must be in control. They have great pride, they're very nationalistic, and very educated. The sticking point at this point, I was told, is that the U.S. and Cuba, if they go forward, the matter of reparations to be paid to the Cubans whose lands were possessed by the Castro administration in 1959 is an issue. Now, that may take some form, who knows. Whether Mr. Trump sees the potential to develop with Cuba remains to be seen. Otherwise, Cuba may stay behind the times for another 60 years. And meanwhile, something important did happen in White Plains this week for the Fix Everybody. At the planning board, the new planning board was introduced, and the new planning board consisted of John Iors, the chair, Justin Brash, Anna Cabrera, John Durante, P. Lynn Oliva, Serena Russell, and John F. Westland. And Robert Stackpole, longtime fixture, is gone. And at the planning board on Tuesday night, we had an appearance by Michael Zarin and the FASNY gang. And Mr. Zarin went over the process as it stands now. I urge everybody to watch that.
The French-American
That's
School
right.
project. This
Yes.
is the new site plan, which was reviewed by the planning board.
Right. And after listening to Mr. Zarin's very detailed update, they did this. If we could have the tape, please.
Communication to the Common Council that we have no objection to this application.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Really
everyone.
appreciate it.
And
So
just
the planning
like that,
board rubber stamped the new application.
Yes.
The vote was 7 to nothing, was it?
that's right.
And so now it goes to the Common Council.
They asked for more work. You know, they're going to be reviewed. I think they have about 7 weeks from October 31st when it was released. I think I have to check that next week. And then
Were you aware that that terms were up on the planning board and that new people were going to be put
well,
on there?
usually they point that out in the agendas, but do you remember seeing anything like that? Well, be that as may, it's
I mean,
done.
I know for sure that there was no big announcement or request that if anyone's interested in serving on the planning board, please let us know. No one asked me if I would be interested.
A request for people's.
Yeah.
Yes, right.
Anyway, over at on the county side, there's some controversy
quickly.
brewing now on the idea for the county to lease out
Right.
the airport operation. Now, Astorino said that he wanted to do that to turn this asset into some revenue for the county. He negotiated a 40-year deal with a company called Oak Tree Capital Management.
Which supposedly they've managed one airport in the country.
Well, they
That's what they
had
said
been
they-
managing the airport in Puerto Rico.
And they don't
but
wanna
they're
manage
they're
that
trying to get
anymore.
out of that deal. And I believe they do one in England, and maybe another one. But in any way, the idea was to bring in $111 million in revenue over a 40-year period, beginning with $15 million for next year's budget. Now, this has run into some opposition from the Board of Legislators. The Chairman Mike Kaplowitz up there says that the time remaining may not be enough to properly review this. Astorino has made this part of the new budget, which they have to pass by the end of next month, by December.
He doesn't have
27th.
enough information, probably.
Something like that.
Yes.
And one of the issues is that this was done on a no bid basis.
I
The
know.
county
How
never
could that
asked-
be?
They never asked for proposals from various companies.
Yes.
So now the company which currently runs the airport for the
Hey,
county.
what about us? We can
is
beat that.
interested.
How many airports in the United States are leased to private companies to operate?
Some. I don't have a specific number. There are some. It's not a dramatic number.
But anyway, this is all being done.
Your major airports typically are run by municipalities or by authorities. In New York, the major airports are run by the New York Port Authority.
Yeah.
It's not unusual. It's done, but one of the big questions is if you're going to do it, check the market and see. Would there be an outfit out there that's willing to kick in $200 million over 40 years instead of $100 million?
Would it be inappropriate for the Port Authority to manage the Westchester Airport?
If the Port
That
Authority,
would have made sense,
if
but
the Port Authority would make a bid
yeah.
to do it if they were interested, that certainly is something that could be arranged. But again, if you're going to do this sort of thing with a public facility, publicly owned property,
How about putting it out?
how about doing something in
out.
public?
Yeah, well-
if you're going to appoint people to the planning board, how about doing it in public?
Okay.
This is what you hear about when you talk about the transparency in government.
There is no transparency in the government. Haven't we learned that after 15 years on this show?
Hey, there's some transparency downtown. There are a lot of windows on the new restaurant that opened, Mediterraneo it's called.
Right.
And you know that the so-called Beehive building that Capelli built across from the hotel project down there, right across from the Galleria, it had sat vacant, no longer vacant, restaurant in there.
Okay, well, this is John Bailey saying so long for Peter Katz and Jim Beneroff, and wishing you all a happy and meaningful Thanksgiving. Good night.
This has been White Plains Week, news and commentary about White Plains, Westchester, and the world. The views and opinions expressed on this program were solely those of the participants. White Plains Week, produced by White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, and presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76 and Verizon Fios Channel 45. You may view White Plains Week anytime on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. For White Plains Week, this is Peter Katz speaking.